Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to begin by acknowledging we're holding tonight's meeting in the territory of the Saanich Nation. And I'd now like to call to order our regular council meeting of Tuesday, April 23rd to order. We'll begin with public participation, and I ask speakers to keep to about 3 minutes. And if you could come to the mic, give us your name and address and press the little button for a red light. I'll call for the first time. Are there anybody wishing to speak?
Thank you. Jocelyn Gifford, 10448 Albay Road. I want to talk about Jane's Walks. The name Jane Jacobs will be familiar to our planning staff and some others. She was an American-born writer and activist, best known for her writings about cities. Sydney's not a city, but a lot of the same principles I believe apply. Her 1961 book, Death and Life of Great American Cities, upended the ideas of modernist city planning and offered a new vision of diverse, fine-grained cities made for and by ordinary people. After moving from New York to Toronto in 1968, she published 6 more books, 2 of which became Canadian bestsellers. She's credited as being one of the prime organizers of the groups that managed to stop, I think it was the Spadina Expressway back in those days. Jane's Walks, inspired by Jane Jacobs, is an annual festival of free, citizen-led walking conversations inspired by Jane Jacobs. The website is janeswalk.org. On the first weekend of May every year, but not limited to the first weekend of May, Jane's Walks festivals take place in hundreds of cities around the world. Jane's Walks encourage people to share stories about their neighborhoods, discover unseen aspects of their communities, and use walking as a way to connect with their neighbors. The Sydney Community Association informally organized 4 small walks in 2018. Councillor Duncan was the leader of one of them, connecting through Sydney's green spaces. In this year, the Sydney Community Association applied to put Sydney on the list of cities around the world that have Jane's Walks. And by becoming the city organizer. We already have 1 Jane's Walk scheduled for this Saturday. All of the information about it is available on our website, sydneycommunityassociation.ca. So janeswalks.org and sydneycommunityassociation.ca. I was going to prepare a handout, but really all the information is there. So we are looking for people willing to lead a walk to show other residents their neighborhoods. And as I said, all of the information is on our website and on janeswalk.org. So we look forward to having a few enjoyable and interesting walks to reveal to other residents more of the hidden or not so hidden, but less known aspects of Sydney's neighborhoods. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for bringing it to our attention and the community's attention. Thank you. Good evening.
Evening. Thanks for the opportunity to speak. My name is Dan Tarno. I'm actually a Saanich resident, but 2 months out of the year I live at Beacon Park. I am the director with Surf Canada, as well as the event director for the Sydney Sup Jam, which is also known as the Stand-Up Paddle Nationals. Surf Canada is the national and Olympic governing body for all paddle sports, as well as surfing, which is now an Olympic sport. Last year we held Sydney Sup Jam here for the first year with phenomenal success. We worked very closely with the Sydney BIA to make sure that the community was very much involved. The focus of the event is always first and foremost the athletes, that they are given the right opportunity to sort of expand their knowledge of what high-end contests are. I travel the world, competing for Team Canada as well as a race official on an international level. This year, we have proposed to do this again. Ideally, we would like to, have many, many years to come. Quite recently, you will, if you haven't already, had a letter submitted where we are proposing to have a beer garden this year. And I just wanted to sort of come forward first before you read about it so that you guys understand that the concept of this event has always been about the community, raising awareness to the sport, offering aspects for the community to be involved with the sport, and then having the athletes. The concept of this beer garden proposal is come from one of our top sponsors, and this top sponsor being Corona. They fund not just sort of the back end of our events, but that money is also used for what we use to get the teams all across the world. We're a non-profit organization. We basically survive on all that stuff. It's a little outside my box to ever have to bring in the beer garden aspect to it. We have spelled out in the letter how it all works. But I wanted to make sure that when we sort of communicated with the community that it was something that everyone was comfortable with, as well as, this is your guys' home. I've come up with an idea that I think works. You may have a whole lot of other ones, we've done this before, and it would actually makes more sense if you do it like this. So I'm under a slight time crunch as far as when the next meeting is that this gets reviewed. I think 2 weeks later, the event's actually supposed to be happening. So yeah, biggest part is I just really wanted to make sure that, one, I got to meet everyone. You can also have a face to what the organization is. Understand that this new aspect to our event has nothing to do with a money grab for it. It has nothing to do with bringing a party atmosphere in that sense. It's a necessary evil for what we use for the funding of sort of the greater good of the whole project. So anyway, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, and thank you for bringing the event back to Sydney. By all accounts, it was a great success last time.
Thank you for letting us have it.
With regards to the beer garden, we would require a formal request submitted through to staff, and which would come forward to council.
Yeah, no, so that has been. I'm just kind of jumping the gun.
Okay, we'll see that when it arrives.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Thanks for your time.
Thank you. Good evening.
Good evening. Fabian Esser, 10322 Minot Place, about the tree removal permit. I've got a couple pictures there. We're requesting the removal of the birch tree to allow for additional off-street parking space through the expansion of our existing driveway. And upon removal of the tree, we will replant a new boulevard tree in a new location on the other side of the property. It's just opposite to the driveway. We've got a couple reasons here. Safety. Minot Place is a very busy and congested road with parked cars on both sides of the road, decreasing the road to single lane. The number of cars is due to the residences of Minot Place having up to 4 cars in a household, and then home-based business and commuters parking on the street during the day to catch the bus into town. And then the congestion is a safety issue for getting us as well as our young daughter in and out of the car on the street. And then creating an off-street parking spot will be safer for us and to get in and out of the car, and as well as safety for the road, helping with visibility and widening the road so cars can pass safely by each other if need be. And also due to the road congestion, I tow a boat around. It's over 50 feet with a truck. I can't get in my driveway, let alone let it go in. So if we can expand the driveway, it'd add up more room to maneuver. And then as far as the tree goes, every year we've had to ask the town to come by and prune it, and the arborist comes by and he trims the tree, and because it grows so quickly low that I can't get my boat in, so the branches touch the boat. Removing the tree and replanting it in a different location would mean the town would have less maintenance costs associated with the tree. And also the town arborist, while we've been discussing removing of the tree with him, he's told us that he feels that the tree could be removed as it's the wrong type of tree for the road now. and also allowing the removal of the tree, replanting of the tree would be in alignment with what the arborist would like to see happen. And the birch tree is a protected tree due to its location on city-owned land. Birch trees in general are not protected and can be removed without a permit or application to the town. And we, the homeowners of 10322 Minot Place, are fully aware of the costs associated with the removal and replanting of its city tree, and will cover all the costs. And thank you for considering and for our concerns and thoughts in making your decision.
Thank you. Just one question as the photos circulated. How old is that photograph?
Which one?
The front one showing the
front one, I think it's from 2015.
Okay.
That was off Google Earth, I think I took it.
Yeah, the tree looks a little larger now, going by
Yeah.
than that. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'll call for a second time if there are any speakers this evening.
Good evening. Steve Duck, 9805 2nd Street. I'm here on behalf of Cycling Without Age Society to acknowledge and thank you as the council and the town of Sydney for your kind grant and aid, which was given to the society this past month. It has gone quickly to helping reduce our operating costs and loan for this bike. We are now starting our 3rd week of operation. We offer 21 rides a week. Each ride is 1 hour. This is all provided by volunteers who are the cyclists, and they are pilots, at no cost to our passengers. And it's amazing how fast the word is spreading, and people are getting the idea of what we're providing to those that are less physically and mentally able to get out. And I want to just share one story. Emily and Bill. Emily and Bill have been married for over 60 years. They now live in separate residences. And the only time they get to see each other is when Emily comes over to visit with Bill. But they never get to go out together until this week, when they got to go out for a ride together. They've spent 60 years together around the province and now in Sydney. And to me, it is a true statement of active citizenship that we're able to provide this service. So thank you for your contribution.
Thank you for sharing the story, and much success to your group. I'll ask for a third and final time if there are any other speakers this evening. Seeing none, I'll close public participation. We'll now move on to approval of the agenda.
Yeah. Second.
Councillor Wainwright.
Yeah, thank you. I'd like to request that item 16.3, the letter from the City of Maple Ridge, be moved up to under new business.
Okay, and do the mover and seconder approve as amended? So on the amended motion, I'll call the question. Those in favor? Motion carries unanimous. Thank you. And we have the adoption of our minutes from the regular council meeting of April 8th.
I'll move adoption of the minutes as circulated.
Second.
I'll call the question. Those in favor? Motion carries unanimous. Thank you. I'll move on to the mayor's report. I'm just have 2 items this evening. I'm very pleased to announce, and we issued a press release today, that the town of Sydney will be welcoming Mrs. Jen Clary as the new Director of Engineering at the town of Sydney. Jen brings a wealth of knowledge to this role, as she possesses degrees in both civil engineering and economics, with over 10 years of postgraduate experience. Additionally, she's a registered professional engineer with the Engineers and Geoscientists BC, and a project management professional with the Project Management Institute. Along with her academic and practical experience, we look forward to bringing fresh ideas and her perspective to the engineering department and the town overall. Jen comes to Sydney from Metro Vancouver, and she and her husband and 2 small children will be relocating to Vancouver Island, and we'll welcome Jen on June the 10th. And I'd like to thank, Tim Tanton, our former Director of Engineering, left at the end of December to take on the role of Chief Administrative Officer in District of North Saanich. We've been without the position filled for some 4 months now, and I just want to thank the 3 staff that we have here tonight and your colleagues for picking up that additional work and carrying on the town's work in that absence. The second item I'd just like to touch on is the Association of Vancouver Island Coastal Communities. They have an annual convention. This year was the 70th convention for the 53 local governments, municipalities, and regional districts on Vancouver Island and the Sunshine Coast. We met in Powell River this year. I was pleased to attend with Councillor Duncan on behalf of Council. Three main things happen over the 3 days at this conference. One is that the 53 local governments have the opportunity to pass council resolutions prior to the convention on issues that affect their community and likely affect other communities either on the island or in the province. And they actually go to the convention floor for a vote amongst all the delegates that were there. There were about 250. And those that passed, there were some 50 resolutions from these municipalities. Those that passed, and the majority did, go to the Union of BC Municipalities, so all 165 local governments in the province at their annual convention in September in Vancouver. And this is a process that helps bring about change. These resolutions go to through UBCM to either the province and possibly through FCM, which is the National Association of Municipalities, and to the federal government. The second piece of business is presentations. And we had some excellent presentations from, along with the presentations, we had opportunities for question and answers from the president of BC Ferries, Mark Collins, from BC Hydro on the winter storm that happened last fall, from Department of Fisheries and Oceans, and several other groups. And it was good information shared amongst the group. And the third is really a networking opportunity to be there with other colleagues from around the island and the region. And we often share common opportunities and challenges in our communities, and it's a great opportunity to do that. So just a quick update on that convention. I'll now move to council reports, and we have 3 this evening. I'll begin with Councillor Garnett.
Thank you, Mayor. I have a couple of quick ones. As a liaison for School District 63, I attended a preliminary budget meeting on April 10th. This is the first part of the consultation process for the 2019-20 budget, and they meet again, I believe, in May. And then it sort of becomes preliminary because they don't have a final budget until they get their actual enrollment numbers from the fall. The 2018-19 annual budget was just short of $92 million. And of that, there was $102 million of accumulated operating surplus as a contingency reserve. They showed a graph where they are projecting not just enrollment growth for the coming year, but for basically the next several years. That seems to be what's going to occur, they're hoping. In 2019-2020 is projected to be close to balanced before reflecting new priorities, and there's a need to prioritize allocation of funds as available. The Ministries expects that a new funding model will be in place for the 2021 school year. It was supposed to be the year coming up, but it's been delayed a year, and all this creates a certain level of uncertainty for planning. The feeling in our local school district is that they're possibly what they're going to use will create more available funds for them. And going on that, their priority at this point of the consultation process is the renewal of information technology. It has fallen way behind, I guess, within the system. Presently, there's a high risk of either an information systems failure and also high risk of significant privacy breach and or cybersecurity attack occurrence could take place. The lack of technology is also affecting innovation and is providing us opportunity to share creative ideas with other schools in a timely fashion. So if somebody comes up with something creative in information technology and they use it for helping certain segments of the school population, it's not able to go quickly to some other that might be having the same issues. So it's taking a long time for that to happen. Basically, they've been working on a break and fix way of doing things with their information technology, and they now want to make it more focused on learning based on what's going on in the future. So that's sort of where it stands now, and I'm hoping to attend the meeting in May, and we'll get a better idea of what their budget is going to be looking like, and hopefully they'll have more feedback from the people that are at this meeting and all the other meetings they hold. And the second thing I need to talk about is the Sydney Museum and Archive Society. We had a meeting on April 13th, and I'm liaison for them as well. There's some good news from the museum. They set an attendance record for the first 3 months of the year at 12,500 and have exceeded their donations budgets for the year in the first 3 months. They had budgeted for 2019 of $25,000, and they're already at 28 in the first 3 months. They believe that most of this can be attributed to increased use of social media. The person they hired on is young and she's savvy with that, so that's working. And they also installed a chip reading machine for donations. So that's having apparently a really good impact on what's going on for them. The work on the Chief Dan George exhibit is well underway and on track. They have signed a contract in place for media exposure with both CFAX and CTV. And just as a reminder, the opening ceremonies are scheduled for National Indigenous Peoples Day, which is the 21st of June, and it's going to start at 10 a.m. So if you are available that day, please make an effort to go down. It's going to be something pretty special. In addition to the Chief Dan George items, there will be local First Nation items as part of the exhibit as well, and there will be local First Nation representation at the opening ceremonies. So I just encourage everybody, if possible, to get down. It's going to be a great event, and encourage everybody to go view it. It's not something we would get, I think, regularly in a place like Sydney. So I think the more people that attend it, the better chances we'll have to get these things in the future. So thank you.
Thank you for those two updates, Councillor Garnett. Councillor Fallett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. On Tuesday, April the 9th, I attended the Regional Housing Trust Fund Commission, and the Capital Region Housing Corporation has 1,418 units, living units across 7 municipalities, 30% of which are near market rent, 70% are rent geared to income. And currently there are 4 projects in progress, which will provide approximately 150 new units. 2 buildings are in Victoria, 1 on Salt Spring Island, and of course the 4th is our Aranza here in Sydney with 56 affordable workforce housing. And I think the Aranza is looking at completion with occupancy sometime May, June. So it's getting close. We've been waiting for it. On Tuesday, April the 9th, in the evening, I attended then Sydney Community Association, and part of what I wanted to say was just usurped by Speaker Ms. Gifford. The Jane's Walks, which I think are an interesting way of looking at our neighborhoods. I strongly encourage it. I did something of that nature during the campaign. I had people walk me through their neighborhoods, and it's really interesting to look at a neighborhood through somebody else's eyes, through their eyes, and hear the stories. So Jane's Walks are that same idea and concept, and I think it's a great way to get to know your community. One of the things that I know the association is looking for are people to volunteer to lead walks. So if anybody is interested, I would certainly urge them to do so. And also that the members of the Sydney Community Association Board have taken up Councillor Duncan's challenge to do their own ecological footprint, so they're on with that one. Then on Wednesday, April 17th, I attended the Victoria Family Court and Youth Justice Committee. Now it's called the Victoria Family Court, but it is a CRD committee, so all CRD municipalities are involved in that. For this particular meeting, Councillor Keefe did join me. She's the alternate for me on this one, and it was just a way of getting to know what this was about, so she came along. The committee's mandate is to be aware of circumstances of youth and families who come into contact with the justice system. Frontline workers, and that is police and social workers, report an increase in youth on the street, and this is throughout the CRD. It's not just downtown Victoria we're talking about. And they're coming from across the country. Mental health is a big problem. Drugs, human trafficking is on the rise. Sexual assaults are a constant occurrence, and that's one of the reasons I'm very pleased to hear that the Victoria Sexual Assault Centre has received provincial grant funding to remain open for another 2 years. VHA has also placed a new mobile unit on the road for youth on the street, dealing with mental health, drugs, whatever is happening. So, much like the Sexual Assault Centre, it's good news that these services are available, but it's very sad that they're needed. But I think to ignore it is, and pretend it's not happening doesn't work. So everything in life is a balance, so between doing that in the morning and the afternoon or the evening, I had the Artsy AGM. And their annual report was presented at the AGM, and I believe Council would be looking forward to receiving copies of the new annual report pretty soon. And I'm pleased to see that the board, and we've got 3 board members in the audience this evening, and the board was acclaimed. Some of the highlights is the Victoria Airport has approached Artsy to open a kiosk art gallery at the airport, and I believe you're still working on hammering out some details on that. But I think that's pretty exciting to bring our artists into the airport and look at sales. And Artsy, the board, and the membership has voted unanimously in support of taking on the Sydney Sculpture Walk and is considering inviting the Vancouver Sculpture Guild to join the committee. And we've got that later on our agenda where we're dealing with the Memorandum of Understanding. And in 2018, they dispersed $7,000 in grants to 8 member groups. And one of the groups, and this is interesting, and this sort of it balances out what I was talking about with the family court. So one of the groups is the Sydney Concert Band. And they told a lovely story that they've got members of their band that range in ages from 12 up to in their 80s. And one of the youngest members joined them because the school band was full and they wanted to play and needed a place to play. So they joined the Sydney Concert Band. So, you know, it's kind of nice to see that when you look at some of the tragic and hear some of the tragic stories that are happening to our youth, and that this is very encouraging. And a lot of the younger members in the band go on to become professional musicians, which was also really interesting. There was so much happening at the Artsy AGM. It was a very full schedule, and it was very exciting and interesting. But I'll leave it with that. And I also have a small update from the Sydney North Saanich Library. We're now looking at a potential soft opening for May 21st. They've pushed that back a little bit. The soft opening means there's still going to be unpacking and working in the library. The official opening is in June, but we're getting near to getting our library back again, so I'm pleased to see that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Fallett, for those many updates. Councillor Rintoul.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. As liaison to the Memorial Park Society, Council had asked me to convey some of Council's concerns with respect to Memorial Park Society, Mary Winspear Centre, and the Town of Sydney employee parking lot. And so I've had a couple of discussions with Richard Paquette, who's the chair of the Memorial Park Society, as well as Brad Edgett, who is the executive director of the Mary Winspear Centre. Also, Councillor Duncan had the opportunity, Councillor O'Keefe had the opportunity to attend a recent Memorial Park Society meeting, and they took the time to become very familiar with Council's concerns and actually watched the video of the Council meeting, and so they were quite familiar with the types of discussion Council's been having. From my point of view, I believe staff here at the town, as well as management at the Mary Winspear Centre, have been very cooperative in terms of trying to ensure that the branding and the utilization of the employee parking lot is well received in the community, working in conjunction with the SBIA. And so I thank staff certainly for your efforts in conveying Council's concerns as well to the Mary Winspear Centre. At this point, staff and Mary Winspear Centre have agreed, town staff and Mary Winspear Centre have agreed on appropriate signage for the parking lot. The lines in half the parking lot have been painted in the blue color to illustrate delineate the parking area open to employees and public, and have agreed on a strategy initially around surveying and better understanding who's using the parking lot during this summer season, so that we can potentially reconfigure our efforts, be it with respect to enforcement or signage, moving beyond what I would consider basically a bit of a pilot period this summer for utilization of the lot. So certainly Council's concerns were conveyed, and to my mind were well received in terms of their efforts to both respect the trust document with which they're bound to have responsibility over as trustees, but also to ensure that the town's investment in an employee parking lot is respected and utilized as much as possible as such. So I'll leave it there, Mr. Mayor.
Great, thank you for that
Thank
update. Councillor O'Keefe.
Just a question. So, one of the things we had talked about in regards to the parking lot was, you know, a time limit sort of thing. Did they have any discussion on that, or am I correct in assuming that we're going to go forward with what was proposed for the summer and then kind of see how it goes? Is that?
Yeah, the SPIA have a summer student who will help with monitoring and with conducting surveys, and I'll yield to staff if they have any other insight in terms of, yes, the go forward period in terms of launching the full parking lot. May the 17th, I believe, is the date to staff for the full launch.
Through the mayor to Councillor Rintoul, that's correct. That's the official opening. We could see a soft opening of the entire lot. Say by the end of the first week of May. They're just working on the east side right now, so in terms of the landscaping. But yeah, I mean, I think we've agreed to monitor it closely over the summer months and look at the utilization. As Councillor Rintoul's indicated, we will be looking at with the SPIA a summer student that'll be surveying the users of the lot to see who are employees, members of the public, etc. And we'll have a good idea in terms of its use, anyways, by the end of the summer. Thank you.
Great, thank you. We'll now move on to staff reports, and we have several. The first is the Memorandum of Understanding with Artsy for the administration of the Sculpture Walk. We have a staff report dated April 16th.
I'll move the recommendation that the memorandum of understanding between the town and Artsy for the administration of the Sculpture Walk be approved.
Second.
Second, discussion? Councillor O'Keefe?
A few things I was pondering in regards to this. So I checked with staff just to clarify, and with Councillor Fallett, my understanding of what the sculpture walk consists of. So there's 10 sculptures, 2 are now owned by the town, and then there's 8 remaining that were intended to be on sale for the public. And so my understanding is that that really hasn't transpired in terms of the selling of those sculptures, and so this amount of money is meant to go to Artsy to help market those pieces of art. And sort of, I also understand that there was contracts in place with the artists, but those have now lapsed, and so there needs to be updated MOUs or contracts through the mayor to staff it. Just clarify my understanding on that.
That's correct, yeah. The inception of the sculpture walk, when artists were solicited to have their pieces located on the municipal property, there were agreements that were entered into. Again, over time, those agreements have lapsed, and indeed, that's one of the key elements associated with the desire of having Artsy look after the administration, is to work with the artists on bringing those agreements up to date and working with them to that end. So that's one of the key components. I would say the sale component aspect is and always has been very, very secondary. In fact, it was seen as a bit of a carrot to get the artists to contribute their pieces to be placed on municipal property and to be showcased the potential of their future sale. Of course, that never really was realized. The town ended up purchasing the 2 pieces that Councillor O'Keefe mentioned, the Sea Otter plaque and Board Dog. Those were never sold to private companies or members of the public or citizens, private citizens. So again, the sale is really a secondary element. In fact, it creates challenges because when pieces are sold, then you're left with a vacant spot, and now you have to go out and look for new pieces. So it becomes more of a challenge.
So, what I'm pondering further is that, like, as you mentioned, as staff mentioned, that there's could be costs to the town if we have to remove those if they get sold. And so I'm wondering if, rather than entering into an MOU to pay $3,000 a year to administer those pieces of art, whether council might consider buying the 8 remaining pieces. We've got apparently, I think we still have a good chunk of money in our community amenity fund that we had been struggling before about what are we going to do with this. I mean, those pieces have been there, I think, 7 or 8 years, and I didn't realize that they were for sale. And I think they've become a really nice part of our waterfront. And so I would actually hate to see them sold. And so what I would be more in favor of is granting Artsy the $3,000 for the first year, but coming back to us with maybe an update on, you know, how much it would cost to purchase those remaining pieces and use our community amenity fund to purchase them.
Okay, so as a question, we have a motion on the floor, moved and seconded, and we're in discussion. So we would have to vote on that unless the mover or seconder wanted to change. If that motion did not proceed, then we could certainly entertain a new motion. Did you have any further questions of staff?
No, that's good.
Thank you. Councillor Rentoul.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and my appreciation to Artsy for your enthusiasm to take this project on. I think it's fantastic, and like Councillor O'Keefe, I think it's a great part of our community and something that I do want to see kept and maintained. The suggestion that was just made strikes me as one that might require some thought and deliberation as well as some research. And I do note that the MOU has, under Clause D, an opportunity to terminate the MOU with 6 months' notice. So I would assume that matter, if it doesn't proceed today, could certainly continue to be addressed. My question is to staff with regards to insurance. I know it's not addressed in the MOU, but it must be, I guess, in the contracts with artists. How is that addressed to protection of both the town and Artsy, I suppose?
Yeah, through the mayor to Councillor Rintoul, indeed it is part of those contract agreements, and again the need to bring those up to date. But it is covered under separate agreements, and insurance is part of it. If I may, Mr. Mayor, just following up on Councillor O'Keefe's comment with respect to town purchasing pieces. Indeed, it was contemplated by staff that that's a real possibility, looking over a period of time. That and it was in discussions with the president of Artsy when we were looking at the MOU. Is there is a real opportunity for possibly Artsy to come forward annually around budget to look at the potential opportunity for the town purchasing a piece, possibly 2 pieces, over a period of time. So we're not looking at maybe purchasing all 8 pieces in a single go, but providing a bit of an incentive for the artists to look forward to the potential future purchase by the town if they're not sold privately. So it was a consideration that certainly staff had, but looking at a sort of a longer term phase in for their ultimate purchase.
Thanks for that additional information, Mr. Humble. Councillor O'Keefe?
Sorry, I did have one more question. So the MOU says that Artsy will seek funding opportunities for the sculpture walk, including grants and corporate sponsorship. And so I was just curious about what that looks like, and what those funds would be used for. So is the idea that they're seeking grants and sponsorships in order to fund what it is they're doing with the sculpture walk, or is it to buy new pieces? And I guess my question would be, if they do receive grants and corporate sponsorship, would that mean that they wouldn't need the $3,000 annually from the town?
Questions through the staff?
If I can, through the mayor to Councillor O'Keefe, it's the latter. It's to look at opportunities to on behalf of the town, so the town would own them, potentially purchase pieces, existing pieces. So grant opportunities to look at us having essentially over time, again, owning the art pieces in perpetuity. And secondly, the potential to grow the sculpture walk, to add new pieces over time as well. Not to go towards the administration component. So I still believe from a staff perspective that the $3,000 would be required to administer that component, but the idea of looking at corporate sponsorship or grant opportunities would be to actually enhance the sculpture walk and the growth and sustainability of the walk over time.
And just one last one. I didn't see anything in the MOU in terms of reporting back to council in terms of progress, in terms of what they're doing, or am I to assume that that's sort of a given, that they would be reporting back to council in terms of what's been accomplished, say in the first year or whatever?
Yeah, it's indicated in the MOU that there's certainly opportunities and would like to see ongoing dialogue regarding areas of concern, and making sure that council is made and staff are made aware of again, potential opportunities, whether it's grant applications, et cetera, so that there's regular communication and dialogue between the town and Artsy. I guess the other opportunity is again through their Artsy's annual report. Again, they should have maybe a component that speaks to their work in administering the sculpture walk again, so that can be a form of annual reporting as well. And of course, you've got the reporting through the council liaison to Artsy as well. So staff are confident that there's going to be regular communication on the work that they're undertaking for the administration.
Good, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Fallon.
Yeah, one thing that, if I can, Mr. Mayor, through you to staff, is the commission aspect. I'm presuming that the old agreements with the artists must have had some part of commission, and I would imagine that Artsy would want to look at this as well. Does that not need to be specified in this MOU?
If I can, through the mayor to Councillor Fallon, yeah, the old agreement, I believe, did stipulate a small commission going to the town in the event that pieces are sold. And again, this was never realized in the last 8-9 years of the sculpture walk. I did have a discussion with Ms. Thorpe regarding the potential for commission opportunities from a staff perspective. Quite frankly, if they're doing the work and working with the artist for the sale, it's I mean, the value of these pieces, they're assessed, and I mean, well, ultimately the value is what people are prepared to pay for the pieces, even though they may be appraised. But so we're not talking about a significant amount. Again, from a staff perspective, if they can be successful in working with the artist to sell a piece, then I guess from staff's perspective, we certainly don't have an issue with respect to them negotiating and benefiting with respect to a small commission. And that certainly can be stipulated in updated agreements with the artists moving forward. In terms of whether or not it should be conveyed in the MOU, staff have no problems putting something in there if that's council's desire. I would probably want to have a bit of a dialogue with Artsy to make sure they're okay with some amendments to the MOU.
If I might comment.
Yep.
That Artsy has, demonstrated experience over many years with the Sydney Fine Art Show and commissions, and I would be open to leaving that open in the MOU for Artsy to use its judgment in setting commissions, and presumably they're going to set fair commissions, which they've done and had success with through the Sydney Fine Art Show.
So if I continue, because we've got 3 members of the board here and they've heard our discussion, I think that message has carried through. One other thing that I do want to touch on is what Councillor O'Keefe was bringing up regarding the town acquiring the sculpture, the existing sculptures and things. Although I have I like the idea to a certain degree, I also think we're hindering the potential for new sculptures to come along. At the end of the day, there's only going to be so much room for sculptures. And as much as I like most of them, I'm quite, I'm because there's some that just stand out a bit more than others, right? Some that I wouldn't mind, and of course that becomes very subjective. Everybody's going to have an opinion. So I don't have an issue with the town acquiring some on a permanent basis, but I also would like to see the ability that we do have some changeover in stock. So I kind of like the idea that if Artsy were to be successful in this and to sell some of the existing sculptures, that we potentially then have space to put new ones in for a fresh view. So, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Fallon. Councillor O'Keefe.
I think this is the last one. But, so in regards to the sale, if they were to be sold, who covers the cost of removing them and shipping them? Would that go to the seller, or is it in, not knowing what was in the previous MOUs with the artists, whether that was something, a cost that the town was expected to cover?
I believe under the old agreements, it was the artist covered that cost.
Okay.
And yeah.
Okay.
If no other discussion, I'll call the question. All those in favor? The motion carries unanimous. Thank you. And thank you to Chair Diane Thorpe and your colleagues for taking on this. It's exciting and we look forward to the future. I'll now move to item 11B, the request for the birch tree removal at 10322 Manaw Place. We have a staff report dated April 23rd.
I'll move the recommendation that the request for the town to remove a birch tree from the municipal boulevard fronting 10322 Manaw Place be denied.
I'll second for discussion.
And discussion, Councillor Garnett? No? Councillor Fallon?
One of the questions. Thank you. One of the questions I have, now the owner of the property brought it up that he would be looking at replacing the tree. And so I have a question, if I may, through you to staff, that if our policy is that a birch tree, the existing birch tree is not the best boulevard tree, and we would make a recommendation to the property owner for another suitable, is there a criteria then, age of tree, size of tree? Are we looking at a little sapling, or are we looking at a significant tree again being replaced? If someone would like to speak to that.
Through the mayor to Councillor Fallett. First of all, there's nothing wrong with a birch tree. It's a healthy tree. There's other birches that are planted on Manaw, and we have other birches within the municipality. It's just the tree that was selected at the time of subdivision to be planted there. What would replace that tree would be a sapling. The larger the tree becomes, the larger the root ball becomes, and it gets to a certain point where they don't transplant very well. So it'd have to be a smaller tree. So it's going to be 10, 15, 20 years for another suitable tree to get to the size of that birch tree.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor O'Keefe.
So I agree with the recommendation for staff, and while I appreciate the residents' concerns about safety, it's difficult for me to remove a tree when we've recently declared a climate change emergency, the importance of trees to our environment, and when I hear that one of the reasons we want to remove the tree is because there's a congestion of more cars in the area. So to me, it's because there's a lot of cars, we're going to cut down a tree. So I think it's inconsistent in terms of our goals towards climate change. So for that reason, I would agree with the staff's recommendation to retain the tree.
Councillor Duncan.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So, disclosure, you can actually see my property on this picture that Fabian has supplied. Mine is the other birch tree at the end of the street here. when he says there's a lot of cars on the street, that sometimes there's 4 cars per household, is because a lot of these are suites, and multiple generations of families living in the same home. So I'm a little more sympathetic towards that. There's also a very high proportion of people who work in the trades on our street. So they're parking like their work trailers. The boats they have are actually because they are fishermen. So I can kind of see. We actually had somebody who was looking at purchasing a house on the street who did ask me specifically. She said, "You live there? Like, why are there so many cars and trucks parked on that street?" And that was the answer I had to give her. So it's not just families that have teenagers and 4 cars, 1 for each person, because they can't share. For me, one of the things that he brought up about the town having to go out and prune this tree all the time. So I'm guessing, perhaps this is through the mayor to staff, if he wants to get his boat out and he doesn't want to request the town to prune it, does he then have to pay the pruning fee for himself to prune it? Or is it always, if he says, I want to get a permit to prune the limbs from this tree so I can get my boat out, and then the town just says, no, we'll come out and take care of the tree so you don't, butcher our boulevard tree? Like, how much effort do we have to go into maintaining this tree?
Through to Mayor to Councillor Duncan, we have an arborist on staff who specializes in that sort of work. And he does this tree along with many other trees throughout the course of the year.
Yeah, he did just have to top one of the birch that's actually just across the street from me, 2 doors down. You can kind of see on this photo here, and the top of it came down in the windstorm and was left hanging there, and he had to come out and do it. So I can kind of see how maybe the birch is not the greatest of street trees. They get really tall and lanky and need to be pruned fairly frequently. So having a different species of tree would also be kind of attractive. Perhaps another question through the mayor to staff. Our tree bylaw is for the replacement of 2 trees for a tree removed. Would we be capable of putting maybe of doing those 2 trees and putting another one on the street?
The bylaw does require for the removal of a protected tree, 2 replacement trees. The challenge is finding a suitable location on the street where we don't already have underground utilities. We don't want to plant a tree on top of that.
Councillor Wainwright.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I think there have been some reasonable points raised, but to me one of the key points is that council and the town should be consistent in the way we handle requests. So we've got a tree preservation bylaw. Our boulevard trees are protected under that bylaw. This tree isn't a hazard to public or otherwise, and the tree's in good condition, and it doesn't meet any of the criteria for removal under our bylaw. So either we should be thinking about amending the bylaw, or we should be saying no, and I am leaning towards the saying no.
Councillor Rintoul.
If I can, Mr. Mayor, through to staff, whose responsibility is it to ensure that the boulevard trees, and I presume it's the town, or is it Hydro, to ensure that they're not disrupting utility services?
Are we talking about underground utilities or overhead or both? Overhead?
Overhead.
BC Hydro prunes trees that are in conflict with their utilities. They have the right to do that under the Utilities Commission Act. So our bylaw does not apply to them.
And having seen the photos and having looked in Google Earth to staff, does this particular tree get attention from BC Hydro often in that sense?
Not that I'm aware of, no.
Thank you.
Councillor Garnett.
I can attest to I delivered in that area for a few years, so I can attest to the difficulty maneuvering down that street. went to the site 3 separate occasions, just to measure the impact of traffic on the street and to look at the tree. And yeah, it hasn't been pruned, but it's growing into the wires right now as we speak. I actually noticed that when I looked there. It also speaks to the revisiting of the off-street parking bylaw when you have family homes and a potential for only 1 parking spot, let alone ones with 2, and then you have this issue, and that street has people with suites. I know that from delivering there. So, and that's what happens. They go on the street because where else are they going to park? So I understand your concerns. I don't think the tree itself is a safety hazard. I'm not sure. I noticed their work trailer parked. I'm not sure whose it was near the end of your driveway, and I could see how that would cause some issues for you coming in and out of your vehicle for sure, because you wouldn't be able to see. And I don't know what bylaws we have in place around people parking their work trailers on the street for extended periods of time. Not sure if that falls under like a 24-hour vehicle or not, but as Councillor Wainwright said, we need to be consistent, and it's difficult for me because I do feel for you in this situation. But we have to make that move towards protecting our trees, and we're going through the urban growth forest strategy as we speak, and the OCP, and looking at what we're going to do to protect the canopy we have in our community. And this tree is healthy, and in itself is not a hazard, as I can see from just looking outside your driveway. So I'm in favor of denying based on that, unless somebody can give me some major reason why we shouldn't.
My comments are that having visited the location, there's a couple of factors. One is with regards to the tree itself. I think it's unfortunate that boulevard trees get to the maturity they are now, and quite frankly, the foliage is just growing in the wires, and so it's going to require ongoing periodic maintenance. I guess it's the size of the boulevard, and that's the placement of the tree at the time that it's built. But it doesn't seem to make sense to put a boulevard tree where the foliage at a certain level of maturity and ongoing is just going to be growing into the wires and require pruning. The second is that this address is at a bottleneck in that cul-de-sac, and with cars parked across the street and on the same side of the street, you can't back a trailer into the driveway. So, if it's a result of there being additional tenants or trade vehicles, the reality is that there's a lot of vehicles on the street. That is a safety issue to a degree for people accessing and egressing their driveways. I think in the situation where the tree bylaw states that there would be a replacement of 2 trees, I would make approval of removal of the trees subject to our bylaw and the replacement of 2 trees. There is another tree close to the boulevard, fairly mature, so I don't know that there's another location on that boulevard or on that property, but I understand we can locate the trees elsewhere in the area. And so I think while we have a reasonable bylaw, that the circumstances in this particular case, seeing that there would be 2 new trees planted to replace this one, where the current tree is and what the situation is in the neighborhood, that I would actually accept the removal of this tree. If there's no other discussion,
If I may, just one further comment, because one of the main concerns from the homeowner is the safety in the street, and I think the removal and replacement of a tree and being able to access the driveway is really not going to change the safety issue on the street. It'll be more convenient for this particular homeowner to perhaps access and come out of their driveway, but it's not going to impact the safety.
Mm-hmm.
So although I'd be, and the mayor raises good points as far as being under the hydro lines, and perhaps this is an opportunity, but I don't think we've got enough reasons right now to do so. So I would stay with denying the application.
with regards to safety, if the proponent is able, if the tree removes and they're able to widen their driveway, they can have both their vehicles off the street and or a trailer. So it does improve the safety on the street if you have one or two additional vehicles or a vehicle and a trailer off the street instead of ongoing on the street. A small point, but I accept your points. No other discussion. I'll call the question. All those in favor? Those opposed? The motion carries. Thank you for the discussion. We'll move to item 11C. We have the Ironman 70.3 triathlon and a staff report dated April 23rd.
We have a recommendation, and I move that the Ironman Canada be granted permission to run the cycling portion of the triathlon through Sydney on Sunday, June 2nd, 2019, subject to the following conditions. That Ironman Canada provide the town with proof of $5 million liability insurance, naming the third party insured as the town of Sydney for this event. That Ironman Canada submit for approval 4 weeks prior to the event a traffic management plan to the satisfaction of town staff and the RCMP. That Ironman Canada send notices to affected residents, businesses advising of the event and provide a contact number should there be any concerns and questions. That Ironman Canada fund a fire department crew to be on call at the fire hall between 7 a.m. and 10:30 a.m. and that no costs are to be incurred by the town in relation to this event.
I'll second that.
Discussion? Councillor Fallon.
Yes, if I may. I've watched the Ironman come through our town now 2 years in a row, and it really is quite exciting to watch these cyclists go through. And in my memory, and staff can correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think we've had any incidents and issues with that. So I strongly urge support for this. And I also urge the public to go out and cheer on the cyclists, right from the early ones coming through, but perhaps even more important, to the latter ones coming through. They deserve to be cheered on, that they're still in the race. It's kind of fun to go out there, so bring a coffee, take a drink along, and get out in the street and just hoot and holler and cheer on the cyclist. It's a fun event. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Councillor Fallon. Councillor Rintoul.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. To staff, can I just clarify? It wasn't clear to me in the report. Under discussion, it refers to the event occurring early morning hours, and it's believed roads will be lightly occupied, so a road closure is not required. Is that the same manner in which this has been addressed previously, that the road was not closed?
Through the mayor to Councillor Rintoul. Oh, sorry. Through the mayor to Councillor Rintoul, yes, the road has always remained open in the past.
Thank you. And next question, if I may, Mr. Mayor, to staff. I see the number, and I haven't zeroed in on it in past, but I have wondered the $5 million liability. Have we used that figure for a prolonged period of time, and on what basis do we come up with $5 million liability for some of these events?
Through the mayor to Councillor Rintoul, MIABC has different recommendations based upon the risk level. So a small gathering in Beacon Park would be a $2 million coverage. Something which has a higher likely of incidents, cycling, falling, becoming permanently or badly disabled, they recommend higher, and $5 million is what they recommend.
And have we, I assume that the reference point you're referring to is some of a table of other municipalities, and they follow that same table?
If they're members of MIABC, they should be, yes.
MIA, okay.
Yeah, sure.
Thank you very much.
Good question. Thank you. Councillor Gunn.
Through you to staff, have 2 years you said it's been running. Have there been any complaints from anybody in the community regarding the event?
Nothing significant that I'm aware of. Maybe a few grumblings, but by and large, it's been run smoothly.
Thank you.
Oh, no further questions. I'll call the question. All those in favor? Motion carries unanimous. Thank you. Move to item staff report, item 11D, the yard waste collection program change. Staff report dated April 18th.
I'll move the council receive this report for information.
Second.
Any discussion? I'll call the question. All those in favor? Motion carries unanimous. Thank you. And we'll move to the monthly building report for March.
Move to receive.
Second.
Call the question. All those in favor? Motion carries unanimous. Thank you. We'll now move to correspondence. We have item 13A, discarded cigarette butts, a request for disposal containers received by email dated April 9th, and a recommendation from staff.
I'll move referring to staff for a report back to council.
Second.
Any discussion? Councillor O'Keefe?
So I guess what I'm thinking before it gets referred to staff for any significant work to be done on this is my recollection is that previous council that we, first of all, that we approved additional funds in the budget for street cleaning, I thought. An extra 5,000 to cover additional street cleaning in the downtown area. And I think it was a recent council meeting where staff indicated that streets maybe had been looking a little shabby lately just because the street cleaner had been out of service. And so I guess I'm wondering if the street cleaner is back in service, and I'm also wondering through you, Mr. Mayor, to staff, whether that extra $5,000 in street cleaning has kicked in yet, and if not, if once that's done, whether that would improve the cleanliness of the streets.
Sure. Through the Mayor, Councillor O'Keefe, yes, we have started working on the extra cleaning. One of the issues with our current street sweeper, which is up for replacement this year, is it doesn't have the turning radius to get into some of those significant bump outs that happen. Certainly with the new model that we're looking for this year, that's one of our priorities, is to make sure that we can get into those curbs. Again, with the no smoking bylaw, putting a cigarette receptacle within 7 meters of an open door or a transit stop or close to a park, is that a bit of a redundancy? Is it a bit of something else that that may or may not be appreciated by certain people? It's a real tough one to get in there. Where do they go? When if you put a receptacle at a certain location, when do you deny a request for another location? That type of thing. You could certainly get a lot of scope creep over time with it. It's again one of those things that we have to look at. I appreciate the fact that you know, there's a portion of the smoking population that discards their butts, and they're not responsible for that. Again, do we take on an extra bit of work to deal with that above and beyond the 5,000? Perhaps. It depends on how much we expand it and where our target is. If you really look at what the CRD bylaw says about the 7 meters from a door front, that pretty much puts you on the center line of Beacon Avenue as the only possible area you're allowed to smoke. But does smoking happen on the main street of town? Certainly it does. So it's a bit of a dilemma for staff to look at and control. Again, we certainly ask for direction from council on that. Is it doable? It is, but how far do we expand it, and to what point do we say we've gone far enough with that?
So yeah, so I guess my other concern was, as staff mentioned, is putting these bins in areas where people are smoking within that 7 meter distance, and so whether that encourages them that, oh, there's an ashtray there, there's a bench here outside of the dollar store, let's sit and have a cigarette. So, you know, I appreciate the frustration from the letter writer on this issue, but I don't know that there's anything significant that council can do, and so I'm leaning towards not having staff spend any more time on this.
Okay, if I can just make a comment before going to Councillor Fallon and Councillor Rentoul. The cigarette butts is primarily an issue on sidewalks rather than the streets. And it's a challenge, having spoken with numerous business owners over the years. It's given where the percentage of the population doesn't smoke now, it's actually surprising to see that that number of cigarette butts, but they're there. I'm in favor of going to a staff report because I think, they will take a look at, are there reasonable locations, outside of the 7 meters that they could be located, or are there other measures? Otherwise, it will be left up to business owners to keep their sidewalks clean. Councillor Fallon?
Thank you. So I did go down, the letter writer noted a specific type of new ashtray type, I forget what the name of it, that had been installed behind the Landmark building, and I did take a look at it. But I've been paying attention to the garbage cans, and I noticed that the rims of the garbage cans are where people who are perhaps not the ones who will throw their butts on the street will put their cigarettes out. So I get that the smoking within 7 meters, but is there an ashtray component that can be put on top of the garbage cans if people are at least coming to the garbage cans to butt out? Is that a cleaning issue for staff, that perhaps some sort of an ashtray component on these garbage cans would be easier or better?
If we could leave that to staff?
Okay, so there's that. And
Yep.
the second part is, I do think we should address it because we saw last summer all the signs from the fire department and said, a preventable fire was started here, and they're usually done with cigarettes. So I think if we can find a way to safely and tidily eliminate some of the cigarette butts, it would be good. Thank you.
Councillor Rintoul?
Yeah, thank you, and I'm in favor of seeing a report on this. I think outside the context of Beacon, if I look at the community as a whole, the previous report that council just received around building permits, and you look at perhaps a transient workforce, who are in town on construction projects. I wonder, given the mobility of these units, if there's not some application there to help people butt out more appropriately in general. So I'm in favor of a staff report on this.
Thank you for those points. Any further discussion? I'll call the question. All those in favor? Those opposed? One opposed. The motion carries. Thank you. We'll move to item 13B, the affordable housing proposal. We have a letter from the Fire Hall Developments Limited dated April 17th.
Move receipt.
Second.
Discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Motion carries unanimous. Thank you. We'll move to item 14A, bylaw number 2172, the financial plan for 2019 to 2023, and we have a recommendation.
Move recommendation that the bylaw be adopted.
I'll second that.
Discussion? I'll call the question. All those in favor? Motion carries unanimous. Thank you. And we have item 14B, bylaw number 2173, the tax rate for 2019. We have a staff report dated April 15th. And we also look forward to a presentation from our Chief Financial Officer, Andrew Hissick.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. 3 of you might have seen this about 4 or 5 times already, but I think for 4 members of council, a lot of this might be new information, and as mentioned in the report, this could be a kickstart to our policy review, which we've committed to in our strategic plan. So this is mainly geared towards the tax rates and the rate setting and some of the concepts around that. I'm not going to get into the policy side too much, maybe just touch on a few things that we'll be following through on in the coming months. So tonight I'd like to cover a few general property tax concepts, the property assessment process, taxes for other governments, homeowner grants and tax deferment programs as a payment mechanism, a little bit about rate setting, about tax multiples, a word on comparison with other municipalities, and just an intro to tax policy. In terms of how property taxation works, we are like a large strata corporation. So everyone who owns property in the town, whether it be residential, commercial, or other types of property, they pay a share of the operation of the municipality, and that share is based on the value of the property they own. So it is very much like a strata corporation, with the one glaring example that it's typically, for a resident, the monthly amount of taxes you pay is a lot less than the amount of strata fees you pay for a typical complex, and you get a lot more for it. And that's through the economies of scale of having our buying power. So the annual property assessment process is essentially a redistribution of the tax burden. So it's not that everyone pays the same proportion as they did the previous year. It changes from year to year as there are fluctuations in the values of properties. So if a property is worth more than it was last year in comparison to the others, you're going to take on a bigger burden. And that's the way it's supposed to work. If you take a 10-year look, you'll probably go up in a straight line, but obviously when there are certain properties that are improved upon, that ends up being a more permanent increase in its relative value compared to the whole. And an important factor is that municipal taxes make up only a portion of the tax bill that everyone gets in May. We collect about roughly half of the total taxes, but the town also sets rates for the regional district and the library service. So another general concept is that non-residential properties pay taxes at higher rates than residential. So for instance, commercial, light industrial, and recreational properties pay at a rate higher than residential, and that's a province-wide norm. And the higher rates paid by non-residential can be viewed as somewhat of a subsidy to the residential component, in that it allows municipalities to provide a higher level of service than might otherwise be affordable if it was doled out equally. So the level of subsidy province-wide varies greatly. Some jurisdictions have a very high multiple for their non-residential. The town is relatively low province-wide, and we'll get into that through our review process. One caveat, though, is that residents pay taxes in after-tax dollars, so we don't get to deduct it from our income taxes, whereas non-residential, they get to deduct their property taxes from their income tax notice. So, for example, if you pay $1,000 in taxes as a business and you have a 30% income tax rate, it's like paying $700 to make it a little more comparable to residential. Property assessments are done annually by BC Assessment, which is a province-wide crown corporation. It creates, by having them done through one agency, it creates efficiencies and provides a consistent, uniform evaluation process. Even though there are assessment offices in different parts of the province, they all follow the same methodology, and theoretically they end up at the same place. It also, having a third party do assessments, it's an arm's length assessment, so the town can't be accused of playing favorites with how we assess property values. So as mentioned before, the annual valuation is a redistribution of the tax burden. So even with no tax increase at all, some properties would be paying more than they were the previous year, while others would be paying less. And it all depends on the change of your assessment increase in relation to the average. It all supports the concept of ad valorem tax, which is based on the value of the property that you own. And like it or not, that is how property taxes work. There are different tax systems out there. Obviously, income taxes are based on income. Property taxes are based on the value of what you own, and so on. None of the systems are perfect. This is what we have, and we've learned to make the best of it. The properties are grouped into established property classes, and some might argue that there aren't enough of these, but generally there's residential, utilities, major industrial, light industrial, and then business other, as well as commercial and farm. There's a couple of others that the town does not have. We don't have any major industry either, but generally we have 6 classes that we see from year to year. And there are different tax rates established for each class of property. So BC assessment sets the values, and the town sets the applicable tax rates for some of the line items on your tax notice. And both entities, the town and BC assessment, we've been reinforcing for years that an increase in assessed value does not necessarily mean an increase in taxation. Our taxes are based entirely on our revenue needs as established through our financial plan, which was just adopted. So we do collect taxes on behalf of a number of other jurisdictions each year. The province of BC for school taxes. It's not dependent on the use of the school system, it's a society-wide benefit. So sometimes I get the argument, but I don't have any children in school. Well, that's not really what it's based on. I mean, somebody likely paid for your education at some point, and even if they didn't, wouldn't you like to know that there are trained doctors and lawyers coming through the system that are being paid for partly through this tax? But for residents, the provincial school tax is largely offset by the homeowner grant. So $845 for the senior grant, which is the one that applies to most residences in Sydney. That for many properties that offsets the entire school tax, and the remainder of it would go to offset other taxes on your tax bill. Another levy that we collect is the CRD levy for regional services. It's for shared regional and sub-regional services, and also some optional services that the town has opted into, like regional housing and, up until this year, the arts service. The majority of our CRD levy is for panorama recreation at about 58%. And a lot of municipalities, the larger ones like Victoria, Saanich, they would operate their own recreational service. They'd collect municipal taxes to pay for recreation. Because ours is sub-regional, we do it through the CRD, and we've chosen to show it as a part of the CRD levy. Regional Hospital District is another levy we collect, and that represents 30 to 40% of the capital costs for hospitals in the entire region. Vancouver Island Regional Library levy, that's the library service provided to the town, as well as North Saanich and Sauk in the CRD. And it's the town share of a system-wide cost, and most of the library system is up island, but we pay a share of the entire library system based on population and assessment. There's a levy on our tax notice for BC assessment services as well. It's not a big ticket item, but we do pay for that service. As well as Victoria Regional Transit, which is our share of the cost of operating the regional transit system. And there's about 10 cents on the average tax bill for the Municipal Finance Authority, which provides great value to the town and other municipalities. So in terms of all the taxes, I provided this table in the report as well, but it just gives you an idea of what the levies are, who develops the budget, and who sets the rates for each of these things. So the only one the town has full control over is our municipal tax. So we develop the budget entirely, we set the tax rate, we have full control over it. We also set the rate for the library and the regional district, but we don't develop those budgets. So you could say we have partial control. And we do have input into all of these through our regional representation. The hospital district, we set the rates, but We don't set the multiple, that's given to us by the province. School taxes, transit, BC assessment, MFA, we have no control over those whatsoever in terms of setting the budget or the rates. Now just a word about the CRD portion of the tax bill. The regional district levy increased by about $10 for the average resident this year. About half of that was for panorama recreation. Another $3 was for regional parks, and $2 for staffing increases for First Nations relations and legislative control improvements. And we saved about $4 by withdrawing from the CRD Arts Service. So the total CRD levy for the average resident is about $320, with 181 of that going for panorama rec, another 59 for parks, and 80 for all the other stuff we get, including CRD housing. Questions anytime.
Councillor O'Keefe.
So when you were talking about the homeowner grant, so does that, and the seniors grant as well, so does that come off our municipal portion? And so do we lose that, or do we get reimbursed by the province, or is that gone?
It's a provincial grant, so the town does not lose anything.
Okay.
So as I mentioned earlier, it first comes off the CRD school tax, and if there's any left over, then it gets applied to other items on the tax bill, but the town does not lose out even if a portion of it ends up being applied to municipal.
Okay.
So in terms of what makes up our assessment base, it's about 87% of it is made up from residential assessments, about 10.5% from business, just over 1% from light industrial, and the other ones are very insignificant. But in terms of the taxes collected in relation to that percentage of the assessment base, you can see that we only get about 71% of our taxes from the residential base, and almost 25 from business, and almost 3 from light industrial, despite their smaller sliver of the assessment pie. So this is what I described earlier, that only about 53% of the tax revenues for a residential property end up with the town. For a commercial property, it's slightly less than 50%. And also on the residential side, that's before the homeowner grant. So you see 25% would go to schools before the grant, but once the grant is applied, that part of the pie will shrink. Whereas for commercial properties, there is no homeowner grant, so what you see is what you get. So this is also included in the report, but I'd like to add that after I prepared the report, we did receive the school tax rates for this year, and unfortunately it is an additional increase to the taxes for the average residents. This was the same as last year, following, I believe, 2, maybe 3 years of a reduction in the school tax. But all told, the tax bill for the average resident is going up about $194 for the year. And the municipal portion of that is about 80. School taxes is about 68, and other jurisdictions about 30. Add in the 2 parcel tax increases, and it comes to 194. And some of you might know I hate doing this for a commercial property because it's harder to come up with an average valued business. But if you use the same methodology as residential, you can say the average business is valued at about $913,000, and their municipal taxes went up by a greater amount, although a smaller percentage than residential. But for them, the school taxes went down again as they did last year. The province sets the rates differently for residential properties versus non-residential. They have a different methodology. So again, business, all non-residential properties got a break on their school tax again this year, which means that the average business, if you can call one that, their total tax bill would have increased by only $52 for this year. In terms of offsets, we've got the homeowner grant as previously discussed, and also tax deferment programs. So deferments are for people over 55, should they choose to do so. Also families with children under a different program. So for those people who are essentially rich on paper in terms of ownership of property, but have cash flow limitations, the deferment program is available to help them age in place, if you will.
A question, Mr. Hissikit. So it'll be the province that determines that the homeowner grant reduces the school tax portion first?
That's just the mechanics of it. That's how it works. So it's a provincial grant, so it kind of makes sense that it first serves to reduce their own revenue before anything else. And they factor that into their revenue expectations when setting their school tax rates.
Thank you.
In a nutshell, this is how our rates are set. So we take the new assessments for 2019. I deduct the non-market, the growth in the tax base, and we come up with a net 2019 assessment base. Then we take the taxes we generated from 2018 and we calculate the rates required to collect the exact same amount of revenue. And then to that new base rate, we apply the general increase, which was 3.93%. There's a couple of very minor adjustments to comply with policy, but that's it in a nutshell. So we take new assessment, take off the growth in tax base, calculate new rates, and then a portion of the tax increase is borne by the growth in the tax base. Talk a little bit about tax multiples, which get a lot of play in the press and something that we're going to be dealing with through our policy review. So as mentioned, various classes of property pay taxes at different rates, and the ratio between one class and the residential is what is referred to as a tax multiple. So for example, for class 6, we have a tax rate of 6.356 per 1,000 of assessed value, and for residential it's 2.188. So if you put 6.35 over 2.188, you get a multiple of 2.9050. So that's the tax multiple for the business class. So then if you apply those two different rates for a property assessed at $500,000, if that property were residential, it would pay $1,094 in municipal tax. But if that same property were class 6, commercial, it would pay $3,178 before deduction for income tax. And as mentioned, residential also benefits from the homeowner grant, and non-residential pays in pre-tax dollars. So when discussing the issue of tax policy, neither the tax rate nor the tax multiple should be considered in isolation. You need to look at both and get the full picture. So the rates are adjusted annually to reflect growth in the assessment base, and that adjustment itself is what has the biggest impact on the multiple. So it's not a shift in town tax policy, for instance, that will change the multiple from one year to the next. It's really about the change in the average assessment of a residential property versus a commercial one. So this must be carefully considered as part of our review. And just to illustrate this and how the rate setting works from year to year. So on the left side, we have Class 1, the residential properties, and the right side, Class 6, the business properties. So for simplification here, we're eliminating some of the variables. So for this illustration, we are saying that there's no annual tax increase, and that's something that gets allocated evenly after the fact, so let's just ignore it. And also for this illustration, we'll assume that in year 1, 2016, the average residential property is worth the same as the average Class 6 property, so $500,000. So in 2016, we had the average residential property with a tax rate of 2.0 generate taxes of $1,000. So a Class 6 property at that same assessment with a tax rate of 4 generates $2,000 in taxes. And so you take the tax rate of 2 for Class 1 and 4 for Class 6, and it results in a multiple of 2.0. Then all of a sudden you go to year 2, 2017, and it's been a good year for residential housing, so the average assessment increases by 10% for residential, but only 5% for the average commercial property. So what we do is we adjust the rate for residential downwards to offset that increase in average assessment. So once again, the average household pays exactly the same as the year before, $1,000. So higher assessment, lower rate, same taxes. Now on the Class 6 side, the business side, their assessment went up by a smaller amount on average, 5% versus 10%. Their tax rate also goes down, but not quite as much as the residential. Yet that average business pays exactly the same taxes as they did the year before, $2,000. So you've got a house and a business paying the same taxes as the year before, so really no policy change, but your multiple has gone up from 2 to 2.1 essentially. And that's strictly a factor of residential assessments going up higher than business on average. Then to make this even more glaring, 2018, another great year for the housing market. Residential properties have gone up 30% on average, and commercial properties again by only 5%. That's a fairly big shift. So once again, we lower the tax rate to ensure that the average house pays exactly the same as the year before. So now you're looking at a much reduced tax rate compared to 2 years previous, but we're getting the same amount of taxes. Whereas on the Class 6 side, again, rate is reduced but not nearly to the same extent as residential. So now the ratio, the multiple, jumps to 2.59 from what used to be 2 just 2 short years ago, and the average business is not paying any more taxes. So this is what I'm talking about when I say you can't look at multiples in isolation. Now 2019, just to illustrate that the shift can work the other way. So the residential market crashes a little bit. The average only goes up by 5%, whereas the average commercial property increases by 10%. So now the tax rate once again is reduced because the assessment did grow after all. But still, we're paying the same amount of taxes on the residential side, $1,000. On the Class 6 side, the taxes are the same, and in this case, the multiple goes down slightly. So hopefully that clarifies to some extent what the multiples are all about and why we can't just look at those when considering policy. And the press will be all over this, and the CFO, all the business lobby groups will be all over the multiple side, but it's simply a lack of understanding of how it works. Now, in terms of what actually happened in the town over the last 5 years in terms of residential and business, you can see that the residential assessments have grown on average by a higher rate than commercial, with the biggest difference being 2018, Well, 2017 was also fairly significant in terms of difference. So the last 4 years, our multiple has been going up, but the average business has not been paying more than they had before. By the way, I didn't provide copies of this presentation, but I will provide them for council.
Thank you.
Now to look at a few nice color graphs. This is a change in multiples since 2007. This is for municipal taxes only. So we're looking at the flat blue line at the bottom is residential. Obviously, that's always the base. It'll always be 1. The red line is light industry. The green line is business. And you can see that they diverged from 2008 through 2016 because of a misinterpretation of existing policy. So we brought them back into alignment, and now they're going to stay that way under our current policy. Whereas the purple line is recreation. It's not a big component of our tax base, but it is something that we'll have to discuss going forward. This is over the last 12 years or so, but let's go back even further, about 22 years. You can see there are more fluctuations in the multiple. Some of these are policy driven, but anything since 2007 really isn't. There were a couple of policy decisions earlier on by previous councils that we'll cover later on during our review. But looking at the multiple only, you'll see that there are fluctuations over the years. So this graph shows the difference between the business rate versus the business multiple over 23 years. So all things being equal, you'd expect the lines to be going roughly in the same proportion, but they haven't been. It's been a little more consistent over the last few years, but still you can see that from 2015 through 19, that upper line is going down while the multiple is going up, and that's because of the assessment changes we saw a couple of slides back. Also from your report, there are 6 different multiples used on the property tax bill. So the town only has control over 1 of those, and 5 of them are set by generally by the province. So any policy decisions we might make going forward are going to impact only about 50% of the tax bill. What you can see from this is that the town multiples for classes 5 and 6 are lower than those set by most other jurisdictions, but not all. And the multiple for class 5 light industrial tends to be higher than class 6 for some other jurisdictions. For us, we've chosen to keep them consistent. So this is a graph showing the municipal versus the school tax multiples over the last 22 years. So when I say that we only control some of them, in the past, the school tax multiple for business has been quite a bit higher than ours, but as you can see over the last couple of years, that gap is narrowing. And that's when I showed you the taxes for the average business, their school taxes went down again this year, just like they did in the previous year. And that's reflected in how the multiple has decreased, and it's becoming closer to our own. A very brief word about comparisons with other municipalities when we do our tax rate setting and policy. It's a real challenge comparing one to the other because it's not always apples to apples. First of all, not everyone provides the same level of service or the same services, period. And even if they do, it might not be the same quality or level that we have. And not everyone includes all services in the municipal rate. I gave you that example before about recreation. So Victoria, Saanich, they have it in the municipal rate, whereas we have it separate. So to compare apples to apples, we have to find a way to make it as consistent as possible. So the primary goal of tax policy is to address your own needs, regardless of what others might be doing, but I know it's inevitable that we'll compare ourselves to others. So one way to make our rates comparable is to include municipal, regional, library, recreation, policing, everything under that you can say is a local government service, to try and capture all of that when we compare to others. And that's something I'll be doing through our policy review, but I'm not getting into that now. So as for the review, we have an existing tax policy, and of all places, we have to outline it in our financial plan bylaw, which you just approved. So our current policy is fairly basic. It states that council will strive to set tax rates and ratios to maintain stability between property classes, factoring in non-market growth. Does that mean anything to you? Doesn't mean a lot to me. It's just a fairly generic statement that it's been in place for a long time. I think we can do better going forward, and I think we'll have to. Second factor of our policy is that the multiple for classes 5 and 6 shall not exceed 3. Well, we're at 2.9050 right now, so we'd better be careful if we're going to do the status quo, i.e. Our current policy, in our current methodology, our policy will likely be breached next year if things carry on as we are. But I think, again, if we can get through this review, we can replace that with something that makes more sense. Another point about classes 5 and 6 remaining identical. That's subject to review, of course, but that's what we decided a few years back. And finally, the distribution of taxes across the various classes be reviewed in the current term of council. Now, it's in our strategic plan for this year, but it's really not up to me to tell you how quickly to do this. So, in terms of policy, there's two basic options for rate setting, and one is what we do. It's setting and maintaining a stable percentage of taxes from each class of property. So there's very few fluctuations from year to year because the only thing that really changes that is non-market growth, the growth in the tax base. So if all our non-market growth is on the residential side, eventually that segment will pick up a larger percentage of the tax burden. But it's minute incremental changes from year to year, nothing significant. So that is the method used by most jurisdictions in BC. The other basic policy option would be to try and maintain constant tax multiples, but it's not used primarily because of the information we looked at a while ago. It would lead to wild fluctuations in terms of percentage of taxes coming from each segment. So within that rate setting policy, it's important to note that the tax rate is applied equally across all classes of property, subject to very, very minor adjustments. So this year, the 3.93 was applied to residential, it was applied to the total of classes 5 and 6, and it was applied to class 8 as well. So the next steps would be that staff will provide council with updated background information from prior policy reviews. We'll bring forward additional policy information, I would suggest, at a future committee of the whole. But council, I would like you to let staff know what your preferred timing and the speed of the review is. I would suggest that if you feel that we have the capacity over the next few months to go on to the next stage of this review fairly soon, so we don't forget everything that we saw today. Maybe in late May, early June, if that's acceptable. But the scope, the amount of consultation we do, And, other priorities that come up will obviously be impacted by what we're facing over the coming months. And if council wants to change the scope or add more consultation through the process, that will impact the timing of how quickly we get through this. That's all I have for you tonight. Any further questions?
Thank you, Mr. Hissick. Any questions from council? Thank you for that excellent presentation and the explanations. We'll now move on to the staff recommendation with regards to the bylaw number 2173. And the recommendation is that the bylaw be introduced and given first reading.
So moved.
Second.
Discussion? We'll call the question. All those in favor? Motion carries.
I'll move second reading.
Second.
Discussion? Call the question. All those in favor? Motion carries unanimous.
And I'll move third reading.
Second.
Discussion? Call the question. Those in favor? Motion carries unanimous. Thank you. And now we have new business item 16-3, the letter from Maple Ridge. Mr. Wainwright.
Thank
Councilor
you,
Wainwright.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So this is, we don't, I'll start off by saying, I guess we very frequently get letters from other local governments asking us to support some resolution or some issue. But it is quite rare that we get a letter of this nature where a municipality is expressing some concern about an action of the province in terms of precedent it might set in terms of local government authority. So this is not something that I would feel comfortable simply receiving for information. I think we should decide what we want to do with it. The concern I have, though, with this is it's pretty clear that there's a lot of other stuff going on, and there does appear to be a dispute between politicians in Maple Ridge and provincial politicians. And it's not clear that the information that we've got from Maple Ridge is a complete picture of all the background. I don't know if the province has already responded to some of the issues that have been raised and what their response is. And I understand that UBCM is aware of the matter as well. And I don't know what UBCM's thoughts on this are. So at this point, my thought is that we should simply table this until we've got additional information, and that actually we should follow up by writing a letter to UBCM and also to the province, simply asking them to, if they have any additional information or comment on this letter. And then when we get that information, we can decide what we want to do. So I'd like to make that tabling motion.
Second.
Okay, if I might ask Mr. Wainwright, or Councilor Wainwright, would you like to just, for the benefit of the audience and those who might watch in later, to just touch on the content of the Maple Ridge letter between Maple Ridge and the province?
It's a pretty complicated letter. Like it goes through quite a lot of detail, but basically they've had an issue with homeless camp in Maple Ridge, and the province wanted to take quick action on it. There was a process that Maple Ridge went through, engaging the community, getting feedback on the appropriate location for a facility of that nature, and I guess ultimately there was a disagreement between the province and Maple Ridge about where this should go, and the province developed a facility on provincial crown land that was contrary to the wishes of Maple Ridge. And the land use aspects of where a facility should go are typically under local government jurisdiction. However, The province is a senior level of government, and in fact, the municipal authority is delegated by the province. So the province certainly has authority to override any local government zoning anyway. There's simply been essentially a policy in the past that they don't do that, that they try to harmonize. A complicating factor, though, is, of course, that this is actually provincial crown land. It's not privately owned land. So that's a factor that's also come in play. As I say, it's not clear that we've got the full background on this. So even summarizing it, I'm trying to be a bit cautious because I'm not sure that I'm presenting the facts. But we have seen other situations where the province has been asked to actually use that ability to override local government zoning. For example, the location of the sewage treatment plant for the Corps, there was quite a bit of encouragement for the province to step in and resolve that, and they chose not to. So here is a case where they did use their power, and it is a departure from past practice, but as I say, it's not clear that we've got the full background.
Councillor Duncan.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm not sure. I'm not sure I would be in favor of tabling this in order to try to investigate and us take the initiative to write to UBCM. I'm not really sure why he's writing the letters in the manner that he is, rather than bringing something forward to the UBCM through the usual process. When I saw the CTV coverage on April 11th about this, I saw that a number of his council were actually pretty upset with what this mayor was saying. For the record, he stated that the homeless people were raping and pillaging his community. And one of the councillors was like, this was a grossly inappropriate thing for the mayor to have done. So I also am not entirely certain that his own council is entirely behind this letter. When he approached Leonard Krug about it, because Nanaimo also has a large homeless camp situation, Mr. Krug basically went, I'm out, I'm not helping you on this, I'm not in, and they actually have a homeless camp. So I don't know why Sydney would be the community when we don't have a homeless situation ourselves, and we just have nothing to do with these, why we would be the ones to take the initiative to do that investigation, when this might be kind of one mayor going off a bit on his own little thing.
Councillor Wainwright and Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you. So I saw the same coverage, and there's obviously quite a lot of rhetoric and some inappropriate things being said, but the principle that's being raised in this letter and what they're asking support about is the provincial government overriding the local government land use jurisdiction. Because if it wasn't, well, in typical circumstances, it would be the municipality that makes a decision about what's the appropriate land use for a particular piece of land. And they went through their process and they expressed what they thought was the, they thought that this use was not appropriate for this particular location. And the province, according to this information, went ahead and did it anyway. And that is a significant departure from what we've seen in the past with the province dealing with local government land use authority. So, as an example, the airport authority, being federal land, does not have to pay attention to local government zoning, but they choose to be a good neighbor, and they do, in fact, respect our zoning. And they also respect the jurisdiction of the Agricultural Land Commission, if land is ALR. And I can think back of a situation, this is about 20 years ago, where the province was proposing to close the courthouse in Sydney, and Sydney actually rezoned the land for courthouse only, which was a pretty strong statement, and the province did not overturn that. They closed the courthouse anyway, and it sat idle because the only thing it could be used for was a courthouse, and gradually over time the situation has improved. But they didn't actually override the local government authority. So this actually looks like a significant departure from past practice and is concerning, putting aside all the other rhetoric. And that would be what I would be concerned about, not the rhetoric about whether the homeless are responsible for higher crime rates or any of that kind of stuff. I don't propose that we would look into that at all. It would simply be the circumstances around that provincial, I'm going to say, interference with local government land use authority. That's the instance of concern. And then your point about Nanaimo, it was actually the mayor of Nanaimo, not the council as a whole, and his comments were that he did not want to interfere or step in the middle of a dispute between the mayor of Maple Ridge and the minister. So it was not entirely clear what the context of that comment was and whether he had any concern about the jurisdictional aspect. I would point out that Penticton has already supported the resolution that they've asked for, so Sydney would not be the first. But it's a situation where another municipality is raising a concern about a significant change in provincial policy. And we could go through the normal UBCM process, but a matter like this might be somewhat more time sensitive, because if the province is starting to move in that direction, they could move quite a bit in that direction between now and the UBCM convention. I am simply of the view that this doesn't look like a receive and file type of letter to me, and I'm just not sure what the appropriate response is right now.
Councillor O'Keefe, then Councillor Fallon.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I share Councillor Duncan's initial views on this in terms of whether Sydney weighs in on this. I don't feel comfortable doing that without having a forum to a place to hear sort of all sides of the story in a more objective manner, rather than getting bits and pieces from a letter, what we hear in the press. And while I understand Councillor Wainwright's point about not necessarily the all the things going on about this homeless camp, but the fact that the province is taking what seemed to be this unilateral action, I would be more concerned if there was a trend. So if I saw the provincial government doing this consistently throughout the province, then I might have a different view. But because this is one instance that we're not really sure about all the facts on this, and because it appears that the provincial government does have the right to override the municipal government if they think that there's valid reasons to do so, even though it hasn't been past practice, I'm inclined to step away from this one. And if it's something that needs to be addressed, I think that UBCM is a place for that to be aired and discussed.
Thank you, Councillor O'Keefe. Councillor Fallon.
Thank you very much. When I first read this letter, my thoughts were just like, oh, this is a big can of worms and I don't want to have anything to do with it. But I think Councillor Wainwright is quite right to pull out the essence of it, which is about the province making some decisions that could affect. And I think by writing to the province and writing to UBCM, asking for further clarification is a good step and doesn't nail us to any particular side. It's gathering, we're asking for further information, and I think that's a fair route to take. Thank you.
Any other comments? Councillor Wainwright?
If I could. So there is a little bit of clearly factual stuff. So the province actually applied to Maple Ridge for rezoning this piece of property that they owned. And Maple Ridge went through their normal rezoning process, including the public hearing and all the rest of it. And in the end, the rezoning was rejected. And then the province went ahead and did it anyway. So all the other rhetoric aside, that is a really major departure from accepted practice. Like, if you're going to do that, why did you bother applying? Why didn't you just go ahead and do it?
Councillor Duncan?
I feel like in the case when we're talking about homelessness, it's not merely rhetoric. That is the fact that Penticton was the other municipality that has written in is probably not coincidental, considering what Penticton was recently in the news for regarding their position on homeless people. That it would go through the idea that it's a fair process to take an issue of homelessness and drug addiction out to the community, when we know that whenever they collect data and they find, we've studied it in Boston here for 20 years, in Vancouver here for 20 years, in Toronto here for 12 years, and they find the crime rates don't go up, and in fact the crime rate usually reduces, and usually the neighborhood is fine, and yet everyone still comes out to say they're going to rape and pillage our community, and the community is always soundly against it. The idea that there was a possible way that we would have people in this community come out and approve it in a fair process seems very slim. So the idea that the province, after having declared an emergency, that we have an emergency with homelessness, that we have an emergency with housing, that we have an increasing number of youth on the street, drug-addicted people on the street, human trafficking increasing, and this is an emergency and they need to take emergency powers to do something about it, and that the kind of people who would go on TV and make the statements that this mayor has done, that the kind of steps that Penticton has taken to try and penalize the homeless community, that this is somehow valueless and is just part of them overriding, a fair process. And I think I could understand why they might have had to do it in this case and why this sort of thing might continue. So requesting clarification from the province on whether or not this is part of that, like an emergency powers that need to be taken on, I can see. But the idea that somehow this is just merely a matter of protocol or something, I find that hard to believe.
Councillor O'Keefe?
Excellent points. I agree with them all. So, and to me, this would be different if it was that, the province wanted to construct a 10-story building.
Yep.
Office buildings or something, but that this is for homelessness, that there's an emergency for. I'm okay with them going a step forward to exert their authority to do something like this.
Okay, if I might make comment, I think a valid concern has been raised by Councillor Wainwright in regards to this letter for the action taken by the province, which seems to be inconsistent with the working with municipalities and their land use. However, with regards to Maple Ridge's request, and that is that we pass a particular motion that they have worded, and then forward that motion in a letter to the Premier, I don't think is the appropriate course of action. Thus, I'm not in favor of tabling this motion, because I don't see whatever the information, if we were to request information from UBCM or request information from the province, I do not see us responding favorably to Maple Ridge's request. Thus, I would consider receiving the letter, and then if council is concerned with the unique action that the province took, to go ahead and contact UBCM or the province, but that the route would be to forward for council then to pass a resolution and forward it to UBCM. So I don't see moving forward on the Maple Ridge matter at all. I see taking the concern that Councillor Wainwright has spoken to, and if we see concern in that, deal with it separately from the Maple Ridge item. Councillor Rintoul?
So if it's not premature, Mr. Mayor, I would move receipt of the letter for information.
Okay, we have a motion on the table to table.
We do?
Yeah,
Oh,
it was
okay.
it was moved and seconded, so I'll go to the mover and seconder. If they wish to keep their motion, we'll call the question on that motion.
I'd prefer to let it stand.
Okay. Any further discussion?
I'm going to pull back from seconding, because I think that's valid. What you said is, sorry, doing it, Councillor Tim Chad. I will pull back from seconding the motion to table and make the request for letters, because I tend to agree that the response to the letter is not something that I'm in favor, but I do want more information at this point.
Question through to staff. Do we seek a seconder to the motion? Is there a seconder to the motion? Seeing none, the motion is removed. And
I move receipt to the letter for information.
Second.
Discussion. I'll call the question. All those in favor? Those opposed? One opposed. The motion carries. And does council wish to entertain a motion with regards to the issue that Councillor Wainwright made vis-a-vis the province and its jurisdiction?
If you're going to make a motion basically phrasing the way you did it before, I would second that.
No, I'm not making a motion. I'm asking council if it seeks to make a motion.
If I could, I guess I've got to make the motion before I speak to it. I move that the matter be referred to UBCM requesting further information. I guess my point is I concur that it's a significant breach of practice. It does concern me. The issue aside, the practice, what's happened here concerns me, but I think it's a UBCM matter. So if we're prepared to refer the matter to UBCM, then I'm happy to support that. I'm not in support of writing the province and asking them for background and explanation.
Just perhaps a point of clarification is that we ask UBCM if they have a concern based on this particular incident of raising the matter with the province, because the UBCM executive can take that initiative and do that. If they're not willing to do that, then we would have to, then they're not demonstrating a time sensitivity to this or a willingness to engage, then it would come back to our council and we would have to make a motion, and presumably it would go to the UBCM convention, given that UBCM is not accepting a time sensitivity. Councillor Wainwright.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and through you to staff, but my recollection of process is to get it to the UBCM convention, you have to put it through the AVICC one first.
That's,
Change?
sorry, point of clarification. AVICC highly recommends that local governments do that. However, there were a number of motions in the AVICC convention that were going to go straight to UBCM. So you can go straight to UBCM with a motion.
Is it seconded? I'm not sure
I'm not sure what Councillor Rintrola landed on with his motion.
Yeah, I think referring it to UBCM was the intent behind it, to try and garner insight from their executive, and so how that is worded, I'm not sure. Councillor Wainwright, do you have a suggestion along those lines?
My suggestion was going to be the UBCM convention's not for quite a while. Some members could give it some thought for a couple of days and bring back a motion to a future meeting. We don't have to deal with it tonight.
Okay, so we don't have do we have a seconder for the motion?
I'll second it.
Okay, so.
Well, I think that's a fair route to go.
Okay, Councillor O'Keefe,
So I'll vote again.
to the motion.
Sorry?
Sorry, speaking to the motion, go
Yeah,
ahead.
speaking to the motion, so I'll vote against the motion. I don't think at this point in time, this is something worth investing time in. I think it's a one-off thing, there was extreme circumstances. As I said before, if I saw a trend throughout the province that this was taking place, then I would be more concerned. But in this case, I don't see investing any amount of time in it, so I'll vote against it.
Okay, I'll call the question. Mr. Humble.
Can we suggest maybe just for clarification that instead of referring to UBCM for more information, to write a letter, contact UBCM requesting more information? It's just the word. It's just we're just unsure about the wording referring to UBCM.
Yep, I appreciate that. And if the
That's a
mover,
great translation, thank you.
if the mover and
Yeah.
seconder
Yeah.
are, thank you, Mr. Humble. I'll call the question. Those in favor? I have 4 in favor. Those opposed? The motion carries. We'll now move on to correspondence for information.
Move receipt?
Second.
Call the question. Those in favor? Motion carries. Thank you. And if we can now have a motion to go on camera.
I move a motion that it is in the opinion of council that the public interest requires that persons other than members of council and officers be excluded from the meeting to consider confidential matters relating to a legal issue pursuant to section 90.1G of the community charter, and that council continue the meeting in closed session.
Second?
I'll call the question. Those in favor? Motion carries. A motion to adjourn.
Move adjournment?
Those in favor? Motion carries. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.